Black Op Radio presents 50 Reasons for 50 Years. Why the Warren Commission may be the greatest fraud perpetrated on the American public. Now your host, Len Osanic.
We owe a lot to Jim Garrison, and in my opinion, he was a great man. He put everything on the line to investigate the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He called the Warren Report a fairy tale and warned us that the media was lying. He was sure JFK was not shot by a lone assassin, and the deeper he looked into the case, the darker it got. Eisenhower warned us of an industrialized military complex. Jim Garrison warned us of the CIA. Opposition to Garrison's investigation did not come from Lee Oswald's relatives. Make a study of where it did come from. It was a coordinated and well-funded attack on the Garrison trial. Author, researcher Jim DiEugenio will elaborate on the struggle that Jim Garrison went through to get to the truth and the facts that led him on the trail of the assassins.
This is Jim DiEugenio, and I am the author of Destiny Betrayed, the second edition, which is subtitled JFK, Cuba, and the Garrison Case. Jim Garrison was elected District Attorney of Orleans Parish in an upset win in 1962. He served for 12 years until 1974. There is little doubt from most objective legal observers that Garrison was probably the best DA that Parish had in the last 60 years. There is also little doubt that by 1966, just before Garrison was going to reopen the Kennedy case, he had one of the most promising careers of any politician in the state of Louisiana, and he very likely could have become either governor or senator. This was all dashed to pieces by his indictment and prosecution of local businessman and CIA agent Clay Shaw. Garrison first investigated the Kennedy assassination on the weekend that it happened. Since Lee Harvey Oswald stayed in New Orleans for 5 months in the summer of 1963, Garrison decided to consult his informant network about who Oswald was in contact with. Assistant DA Herm Coleman took a call from Jack Martin, who had worked in Guy Bannister's office at the time. He told Coleman about Oswald's relationship with one David Ferry, a man who worked for and with the CIA efforts against Castro from before the Bay of Pigs all the way through Operation Mongoose. It later turned out that Oswald knew David Ferry for many years previous because he had served in Ferry's Civil Air Patrol unit as a teenager in 1955. Many witnesses saw Oswald with either Bannister or Ferry in the summer of 1963, and many witnesses saw Oswald in Guy Bannister's office at that time also. Garrison did not know anything about this intriguing background when he brought Ferry in for questioning in November of 1963. He therefore turned him over to the FBI. Ferry lied his head off in his FBI affidavit. For instance, he said he never owned a telescopic rifle, or even used one, or even would know how to use one. The fact that J. Edgar Hoover allowed Ferry to perjure himself and to also obstruct justice reveal that the director had no interest in solving the JFK case. Garrison then reopened his inquiry in November of 1966. He quickly discovered two things about Oswald that startled him. First, that Oswald had taken a Russian test while in the Marines. Second, that on at least one of the flyers that the pro-Castro Oswald was passing out that summer, Oswald had stamped the address 544 Camp Street. Garrison went to this address and discovered it housed the offices of Guy Bannister. This caused him to reassess the portrait of Oswald painted by the Warren Commission. Instead of Oswald as a communist, Garrison now saw him as an agent provocateur, or double agent. This now ignited his full-blown reinvestigation of the JFK case. In the declassified files of the Assassinations Record Review Board, one of the most arresting discoveries has been that the infiltration of Garrison's office by the CIA began almost as soon as Garrison ordered the Warren Commission volumes. And in fact, Gordon Novell, who was recruited by Allen Dulles to do so, wired Garrison's office for sound and gave some of these tapes to Walter Sheridan, who was preparing a hit piece on the district attorney with the permission of David and Robert Sarnoff, the owners of NBC. Sheridan, of course, then attempted to flip or turn some of Garrison's witnesses, which he was successful at. This and the mysterious death of David Ferry very much hurt Garrison's case, but he then went ahead and indicted Clay Shaw. With Shaw scheduled to go to trial, the efforts to undermine Garrison now were ratcheted up into a higher gear, especially since the DA was now discovering a treasure trove of evidence to substantiate his concept Kennedy was killed as part of a high-level coup d'etat. For example, the plentiful evidence of Shaw, Ferry, and Oswald in the Clinton-Jackson area, the Rose Cherami incident, which led to the identifications of Sergio Arcacha-Smith and Emilio Santana, the identification of Shaw as Clay Bertrand, the man who called Dean Andrews and asked him to go to Dallas to defend Oswald. By late 1967, Richard Helms had ordered the CIA to organize a top-level group inside the agency called the Garrison Group. This included Helms' assistant, Thomas Karamessinis, and James Angleton's top assistant, Ray Roca. Angleton and Roca now began to keep enormous files of information on what Garrison was turning up. And now even more attempts at subterfuge took place through the likes of pseudo-reporter Hugh Ainsworth and CIA agent Bill Boxley. The CIA began to influence out-of-state and sometimes in-state judges not to honor subpoenas to return witnesses, and people like Hugh Ainsworth began to surveil, bribe, and harass potential witnesses like local Sheriff John Manchester in the Clinton-Jackson area. By the time of the trial of Clay Shaw, this effort went up even to a higher gear. Richard Case Nagel, who Garrison once called the most important witness in the case, had a hand grenade thrown at him. Clyde Johnson, who met Clay Shaw and was instructed by Clay Shaw to make inflammatory speeches against Kennedy to bring him down to New Orleans, was beaten to a pulp within a hair's breadth of his life. Aloysius Habekorst, who Shaw revealed that his alias was Clay Bertrand too, was rammed by a truck before he was going to testify. Because of all this extraordinary interference and the real-time monitoring of the actual trial, Shaw was acquitted. It later turned out that, as Garrison suspected, Shaw had committed perjury numerous times by saying that he never worked for the CIA, did not know Ferry, and did not know Oswald.
I did not know Harvey Lee Oswald, nor did I ever see or talk with him or anyone who knew him at any time in my life.
Garrison's attempt to try Shaw on those charges was stopped by a state court, and a very organized effort was made to get him out of the DA's office and replaced by the man who had monitored the trial of Clay Shaw for the Justice Department, a man named Perry Connick. This ended up being very bad for the people of New Orleans because it was successful. Garrison was defeated at the polls by Connick because Connick ended up being one of the worst DAs New Orleans Parish has ever had. The idea, of course, was not for the people of New Orleans. It was to make sure that no more indictments would ever come out of New Orleans, but also to make an example out of Jim Garrison, meaning that the message was there. No other DA should ever try and do this, or we will do to you what we did to Jim Garrison. And unfortunately, that message ended up being communicated very well, since no other DA has ever tried anything to reopen the Kennedy case.
Stay tuned for the next installment as we expose week after week 50 lies the Warren Commission would like you to believe.